Hi. Thank you for coming. I've been looking forward to spending time with you. It was a year ago, I guess, that I was here, and I was so impressed with the community, the professional change community, and even more impressed this year when I've come back with the new folks I met. So congratulations for being a magnet for some strong talent. Our profession needs it. You guys are doing what you need to do. Am I not hooked up?
No, here. Here it goes. There you go. Just down like a scarecrow.
I can hear you great.
You can hear it.
Yeah.
Well, just tell them what I said.
There we go.
All right.
There
Is
we
it better? Okay. So let me tell you what I'd like to cover. How many of you have been in this profession more than 5 years? More than 10? More than 15? More than 20? More than 25? More than 30? Okay. Let me start with the concern I have. My concern is the people entering our profession. The good news is as a profession, we're doing a wonderful job of teaching the basics, in my opinion. I think when I started in the early 70s, there was no method. Well, there wasn't a profession, okay? There was no methodology. We have wonderful methodologies, all very available now. My concern is, so where do we send people after they've got their certifications? How do you pursue mastery in this field? Not proficiency, mastery. And so that's what I want to speak to tonight, is some aspects that to me are important about mastery. Let's see if this works. Yeah. So I began a research project now maybe 5 years ago. I started, instead of going to practitioners, I went to the consumers that hire us. Whether they hired you full-time as an employee or as a consultant, didn't matter. I went to people spending money on us. And I said, what value are you getting from us? This is what I got back. And I went to senior officers, right? So it was a very small, relatively small population that I went. 25% of them said, so the question was, what value are you getting from our profession? 25% said, I'm not getting any value. I wish you people would go away. You're overhead. I knew there would be some of that. It was higher than I thought. And I wish it wasn't there, but it is. 65% said, I'm getting plenty of value. I really am glad that you folks are around. Whatever I ask for, you seem to do, and you do it well. I don't consider you a strategic resource, but I really like the tactical support that you give me. If I need a communication plan, if I need a rollout plan, I want to change person around. 65% of the time, what they said about us was, those of you are in that room, you're considered very adequate. I'm glad you're here. I don't consider you a strategic resource. Only 10% of the time did I have senior officers say, you guys are assets at a strategic level for us. You're crucial to important changes. Only 10% of the time. So I've spent the last 5 years trying to crawl into what's going on with those 10%. What is it they're doing to generate this much value? And who are they working for? So that's what I want to talk about tonight. So first, a bit more about the adequate practitioners. It's very important to me to be clear about something. Adequate is not, I'm not using this as a pejorative term, okay? An adequate practitioner is delivering at exactly the level the client's asking for. So there's no negatives here, as far as I'm concerned, okay, at all. They're delivering what's expected, consistently good results. So let's be clear that this is an honorable way to practice our craft, right? It's just not 10% work, that's all. That's all, it's just different, it's not bad. So they make a contribution. There's also some limitations though. These practitioners were consistently seen as tactical resources. So they were typically deployed down in projects, to the side in a peripheral role. They had a seat at the table, but they weren't turned to that often unless it was considered a tactical support issue, which leaves them feeling somewhat marginal, which if you're marginal, there's a tendency not to stick your neck out too far because you're expendable, which means that they tended to avoid controversy, which means that they would filter what they would have to say. And it became, what happens is there's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think of you as a tactical resource, so I invite you to the table as a tactical resource, and then you talk like a tactical resource. So I'm glad I had you where you need to be, right? It becomes self-reinforcing. Wonderful contribution from this part of our profession. It also has its limitations. So let's draw a comparison to the 10%. I just had to give it a label. I gave it a high impact level. The label is high impact. These practitioners are considered crucial assets to senior leaders. I don't even want to think about going into a major change initiative without this person surgically attached to my hip. This is not a vendor, this is a partner. And by the way, I'm not using vendor as an external characteristic. You can be an inside full-time vendor in terms of how people relate to us, right? Their views about what's going on, what are the options, how to interpret the data, the change data, these are sought out as opposed to, please let me get my report squeezed in somehow into the meeting. They're coming to this group saying, would you please help us understand what's going on? So they're considered a rare resource. We're going to talk about a bit more about that. I want to re-say it again. The only pejorative I have to offer you is I wish the 25% would go sell hamburgers somewhere or do something else, but they're not going to. We're always going to have those 20, all right? There is no negative spin here about doing adequate work for a whole range of reasons, but let me give you one of them. Most clients want 65% work. That's what they want. They don't want 10% work, and you'll see why in a few minutes. 10%ers are too pushy for most clients. So this is actually a good match. We're providing value, we're doing exactly what the client wants, and so let's not have any negative spin about that, but it's also not pretend that there's not some of our practitioners have an exceptional impact with key leaders. This is when I asked the executives, all right, okay, you've got this category. I mean, I had to name the category, but they said, not many of you, but some of you do this. What are you getting from these people? Well, I can trust it because these people have been at it a long time. They clearly have solid knowledge base. There's a track record. This usually translates into brand. So it's an internal or external brand. You have a reputation. Or maybe I've worked with you before. It can come in any way. Contextual awareness. This is an important one. What I heard from them about the 10%ers is the person I work with doesn't just talk to me about change management. They talk to me about my business. They understand the context. So when we talk about sponsors and culture and all that, it's within a frame of reference of me running the business, and I really value that. So that's what I mean by contextual awareness. They were also seen as, remember I said they're a rare resource. They bring a perspective I can't get many places. A vendor is bringing you something that everybody has. And if you don't like what they have, you can go get another one somewhere else. A partner brings you uniqueness, something different, a viewpoint that is not easily acquired. And the last one is they present those viewpoints in a very bold manner. They're not shy about it. now, this doesn't translate to decibel levels. So the practitioner could actually appear to be kind of calm, but man, do they listen to him or her? And that person has a lot of impact because they're very definitive about whatever they're saying. This is what I heard from the consumers of our profession as descriptors for the 10%. So we've got two populations. We've got practitioners in our profession that don't have any influence to speak of with leaders. It's either because they're novices and they just started, or they ought to be doing something else, right? They're the inadequate ones. And by the way, I'm in no position to say that these people are inadequate. They are perceived to be inadequate, though, right? That's what we need to pay attention to. This group, I don't know, maybe the second group has more skill than the clients realize, but the client is relating to them as adequate, not as high impact. So we've got those that have senior level influence than those that don't. Those that have the influence, they either fall into the category, the adequate category or the high impact category. So let's talk about, you've got 10%ers that can have a tremendous amount of influence with any level in the organization they work with. So you could be a 10%er if you were consulting with a first line supervisor, okay, anywhere. I had to come up with another term for a subset of the 10% that work with senior officers. So I just came up, could pick anything. I just said, all right, we'll call them high impact trusted advisors. These are change practitioners serving the C-suite, or if not that, upper echelon leaders, okay? Now, why is that important to us? Why I think it's important is, as a profession, if we agree that our profession makes a difference, then we need to be attentive to where we apply it. And I think we have a responsibility to apply it where we would have the greatest leverage. So there's nothing wrong with providing change management to a first line supervisor. We should. But that supervisor might impact 5 people. If we could impact a CEO who would impact the organization, who would impact the customers, it's a very different leverage model. So 10%ers tend to gravitate in that direction, and not because of ego, but because of desire to have maximum impact. Does that make sense about motive? So let's talk about them. I said this is why this 10% seemed to gravitate, was for the reasons that we got here. Now we're in a subset of the 10%, and when I asked the leaders that were working with them, what are you getting? I got these 2 words. This person operates strategically, which means this is a resource for critically important projects, not always enterprise-wide, but often, but really important projects. And this person's not a commodity. It'd be really hard to replace this person. Now, I could hire somebody else. I could fill the slot. That's not the point. This person's bringing some uniqueness that makes them invaluable. They're not easily disregarded. Okay? Those are the 2 terms I heard most often. Now, I'm measuring influence here. So some practitioners have no influence with senior leaders. Some have, with leaders. Some have influence at an adequate level. Some have high impact influence, and then a smaller group has this high impact trusted advisor influence. So let's be clear about what I mean by influence. I don't measure, when we're consulting with leaders, to me we shouldn't be measuring ourselves against, do they agree with us? Or even do they apply our recommendations? The kind of deep influence I'm talking about is, do they listen to and respect and internalize what you have to say? Many practitioners want to keep score based on, well, how many of my recommendations did they apply? What I want to do is keep score on how deeply did they listen and value to what you had to say. See, to me, we have tremendous influence, on a leader, even if the leader moves in another direction. And here's why. I don't think that we are responsible for making sure leaders do the right thing. I think we're responsible for making sure they make informed decisions. That's a different way to keep score, guys. If we're responsible for them doing the right thing, then we lose even when we were impeccable with our recommendation. But if our recommendation is turn left and they turn right, they're turning right informed about the concerns that you had, okay? I think that's our job. So that's what I mean by influence. What I've learned about the 10% zone is that it's not about methodology, but not because methodology is unimportant. It's vital that you get grounded. I don't care what methodology you use, just get really good at it. So this isn't to say methodology is unimportant. It's table stakes, that's all I'm saying, okay? What, in addition to methodology, do you rely on? Well, to me, it's not about the content of what we have to say, it's about the relationship that we build when we're providing that content. That's where 10% work is done. 10% is focusing in on the relationship. The 10%er is going to use some of the same tools as the adequate practitioner. So it's not about methodology. When you look at relationship building or relationship establishing between practitioner and leader that you want to serve, there are many variables. I'm only pulling out a couple of them because of our time limitations. So I want to focus on a little bit about fostering the kind of rapport that would allow you to have 10% relationship with somebody, and also what do you need to bring to the table, all right? So let's first talk about rapport. I'm going to share with you a criteria that I use. You're welcome to it, but my message is mainly that you need a criteria. If mine works for you, that's fine. And what I mean by it is if you aspire to 10% work, realize that you could be an impeccable 10% practitioner unless you match yourself with a 10% leader, it doesn't work. So you can't be a 10% practitioner taking 65% engagements and operate at the 10% level. So to me, each of us need to have a checklist, or whatever you want to call it. So when we first sit down with that prospect, and I'm using that term neutrally. I don't care if you're an inside practitioner. You still are sitting down with somebody for the first time, okay? When you sit with a prospect, it's important to get clear early about what's the context they're operating in. Because if they don't have a certain context, there's frankly no justification for a 10% relationship. These are not leaders that have a lot of time on their hands and they're waiting for another relationship, okay? So what would warrant me opening up my calendar to have another intense relationship? I use these three things. You're welcome to them, but the main thing is you find out what questions you want to ask. The questions I want to ask is, this thing you want help with, is it transformational in nature or incremental? What are you going for? Are you going to measure yourself against installation metrics or realization metrics? An installation metric is we have 100 people to train. A realization metric is, did they actually apply that to shift their relationship with the customer, right? So how are you keeping score? The third one is this a good idea and you hope it works? Or is it an organizational and personal imperative? On my watch, this is going to happen. I don't even know how we're going to do it. This is going to happen. That kind of investment. What I've learned, and again, this is just my criteria, you've got to figure out, what I've learned is I have to enter into a system that would warrant a 10% relationship. Why would you want a 10% relationship if you're going for an incremental change, installation's okay, and yeah, it'd be nicer if it worked. There's no urgency, you don't need counsel for that, right? You might need an adequate technician, but you don't need high impact trusted advisor. So I think of these as continuums, right? How far into transformation? It's not binary. How far into this being a personal imperative? This works for me because it sets a tone where they aren't looking for, with this involved, this in mind, they're not looking for a practitioner. They're looking for somebody that that can bring all of the 10% characteristics that we're talking about. You have to justify the 10% work. And it's justified by certain things being true. I've found that this is helpful. So these are the questions I ask. You're welcome to them if they work for you, but find questions that you would ask early so that you can help the leader and you can help yourself quickly determine what's the nature of this relationship. And sometimes the answer is going to be, there's no reason for 10%. So now you've got to decide, well, do I want the 65% work? Because for many of you, it's not either or, you'll have a portfolio. A certain amount of your work is going to be 65 and a certain amount is going to be 10, right? So on the 10% side, we're talking about a context in which they would relate to you as a partner instead of a vendor. And this is the difference in the relationship. One is they're reluctant to accept anything that, much of any kind of guidance. The other is they're really drawn to it. One has to do with just bring it to me simple and cheap. The other is I actually want it to work. One has to do with, just bring me feedback that doesn't disrupt anything, okay? And then I'm good. The other one is actually looking for brutal frankness. On the left, I don't exactly know what's going on, but would you go off and fix it, please? On the right, it's how do we work together to make this thing where it needs to be? The next one, you're supposed to be a change management specialist, but by the way, we've got this other kind of HR thing. Would you help out with that? And you get deployed. I'm not suggesting it's not stuff you know, maybe you know how to do it. That's not the point. You're not treated as a rare resource. You don't take rare resources and spread them out to, just fill slots, okay? You don't take the heart surgeon and ask him or her to run the first aid station. It's not an ego thing. It's just not good resource allocation, okay? So that you don't see that with partners. And finally, access is really important. A partner is part of the inner circle, and you get access. Not just you get access, the leaders are chasing you because they're very busy. So can you talk Saturday morning? I don't land till 10 o'clock Friday night. Can we? So access is a very different situation. Can you relate to these two contingents? All right, we're going to come back and talk about this later. All right, so the first half, if you will, of this formula has to do with establishing the rapport that would allow us to be partners instead of vendors. This part has to do with, as a partner, what do I show up with? What am I bringing? And what I've learned is that it's at least as important that you bring who you are as what you do. By what you do, what I mean is the tools and techniques and concepts that we all are methodologies. That's what we do. If all you bring is methodology, you'll be considered in the 65% zone. If you can add to that the uniqueness of who you are, if you can create value out of the perspectives that you bring that very few other people can, then that at least opens up an opportunity for you to be a partner. So what do I mean by this, who you are? It's a bit ethereal, right? What I'm talking about is most of us have been taught formally or informally that you don't want to be too direct and explicit with clients because they might get a little upset. And you could lose the engagement, you could get fired. There's all, so most of us have learned how to water down what's actually being said, so we're kind of being honest, but let's not go too far. So what I want to talk about is the part of you that if you were brutally frank about exactly what's going on. So, for example, the CEO who hired you is at the epicenter of the pathology, and you would say it that way. Where does that come from? I'm going to call that character. Could have picked any term. I'm just going to say that comes from the core of who you are. What we've done with the core is we've learned how to filter it, right? And when I say unfiltered, I don't mean rude. I mean direct, explicit, right? Where does that come from? Let's call that character. Well, I mean, that's a nice concept, but a few years ago, I came across this picture that I think is a good symbol for this. So this is a sculpture. The artist is Giuseppe Pannoni, Italian artist. And what he does is he takes trees, big trees, and he carves this stuff in it. The name of this piece is called The Life Within. And when I first saw it, I thought, wow, how cool. This guy took a tree, and what he's doing is characterizing the sapling that the tree originally came from. And I thought, well, yeah, that's kind of a good symbol. That sapling is where, that's the core of who we are. Well, yeah. And then I got into actually learning how this guy operates. This is not a rendering of the sapling. This is the sapling. You know what he does? He takes away the trunk that's covering up the sapling. That's what you're looking at. That's actually where that tree started. What I think is we've done to ourselves is I think we've got lots of trunk layers on top, which isn't so problematic at the 65 level. It's very problematic at the 10% level. That's not what that work is about. That work is about bringing sapling forward. Now, you cannot randomly bring your sapling forward. That's not career enhancing. So you have to be selective about who you work with. Well, already I'm freaking some of you out because you're going, nobody asked me who to work with, I'm assigned. I'm not here to make you feel better. I'm here to tell you what the criteria is to work at the 10%. At the 10% level, you have to be able to say yes or no about your assignments. Because maybe she needs somebody, and my boss sent me over here. That doesn't mean she's up for 10% work, okay? So 65% work is a lot easier to match. 10% work, I got to do my thing. She has to show up as a 10% leader. She's got to be open to this feedback. All those, okay? So the sapling is, if I actually related to her as a 10%er, that would be coming from what I'm going to call the character. Now, so there's two doorways here. Character is the first one. Two doorways to who you are. One other thing I wanted to say about this. What I'm really intrigued with is the symbolism here. So this guy he's going in and he's pushing away all the trunk that isn't the sapling, right? Look at how long he's been at this, right? This is not an overnight. You don't go, maybe this weekend I could kind of get to my sapling. It's a lot of work. Also, you can't outsource it, okay? So you have to crawl inside and explore. So anyway, there's a lot of symbolisms here that to me are intriguing. So there's two ways to come at this notion of bringing forward who we are. Character is one of them. Character is what is left after we stop playing all of our games. How do I keep my boss happy? How do I not freak out the client? I'm not suggesting these things are unimportant, okay? What I'm suggesting is 10% leaders aren't interested in that. What they want to know is, what do you actually believe? So you have to match up with people that they want to pay you for being who you are. Guys, it doesn't get any better than that, okay? They actually don't have patience for all the vendor stuff. All right, so character is the core of who you are. Now, here's the problem with character. It's so embedded that you can work with somebody a long time and not know, that, in my opinion, you don't know their character. What you know is their presence. That's the interface. All right? You'll never know my character. That's my DNA. What you see is how I relate to you. So the word I'm giving that is that's the presence I create. Now so we have the core of who I am, and then we have the presence I create. Now the question is, so how authentic is the presence compared to my core? For most practitioners, we've been taught to have a very different presence than my core. So I think the CEO is at the center of this problem. I'm going to say something a little less than that. Maybe not even mention it. 10%ers have an alignment, an authenticity. They bring forward actually who they are, what they see, what they actually believe is needed. So you end up with a package. Each of you have a character and presence package, and it's like no other. You all can be certified in the same methodology. Nobody gets your package. You have your core character, and you have the presence and how authentic that presents itself. Now the art form here is, are you creating value by blending these? Is your value creation through methodology, or is it through methodology and who you are? That's the question. 10%ers integrate the two, because that's where you have the greatest impact. I'm not suggesting 65ers don't have impact. Please don't misunderstand it. It's an honorable way to practice our craft. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm glad it's there. It's just not the greatest leverage. The best leverage in our profession is to be an advisor to a leader high enough in the echelon to affect a lot of people. And if you were to serve, you could serve that person as a 65%er, but if you were to serve them as a 10%er, you would be bringing actually who you are. And you would consider it, and so would they. They would consider it who you are as part of the value. Because they can get what you do from another vendor. So the question I want to pose to you is, do you consider yourself a precious resource? Because that's what I'm talking about. Not a proficient resource. Do you consider yourself rare in you're really good at what you do and no one brings forward who you are? You've got a combination like nobody's going to see. Now, that won't fit for everyone, so you've got to find leaders that's the combo they want. That's when you have your maximum impact. So I think that these are the issues we've got. Number one, none of what I'm talking about tonight has any relevance until you get really grounded in methodology. That's task one. Get really good at whatever tools and techniques you've decided to use. Now deal with, well, who am I and how do I bring that forward? What is that like, character and presence? The third issue is, where am I going to practice the craft? What altitude? Because I could do the first two with first-line supervisors in the 65% zone. If I aspire to go to that high leverage, then I've got to know how to establish rapport at the senior level. That's it.
Mic drop.
Mic drop. What's confusing? What's scary? What do you wish wasn't true? What do you not believe is true? Let's talk. Yes, ma'am.
So what would be your suggestion for someone relatively newer in their career in this field to get to step 3?
Just don't even think about anything except nailing down all your training. You can get certified in one thing or 50 things, but don't stop there. Get good at it. I mean, certification doesn't make you good. Get out there and get some scar tissue, use it, because for a lot of the young people coming in, I mean, all this stuff looks cool until they do it, and they go, I don't like this. Well, okay, great. You know, there's other professions. So I just was on a Skype thing with a bunch of newbies, and that was one of their questions. And I said I wouldn't even spend any energy on this, because who you are lays on top of what you do. You do the reverse, it's too ethereal, right? I mean, hey, you're really an interesting person. Do you know anything about change, right? So I would start there. Now, after you've done that for a while, then there's an important question. Is this a job or a calling? To the degree it's a calling, am I going to be good, or am I going to go for mastery? Right? So these are gates, and what the 10%ers, it's a calling, and when I talk about mastery is not, I'm not using it as a terminal point. I don't believe there are masters in our field. I think there's people on a mastery path, because every time you take 3 steps forward, the horizon moves, right? So it's one of the reasons why a lot of our colleagues decide not to go in this is, I just want to do certification and be done with it, okay? And first of all, there's no certification in who you are. There's only work in uncovering it and bringing it more and more forward. So none of that to me is really relevant until get some scar tissue. That's where people should start. What else? Yes, sir.
So what did your research show, or what have you found, or what is your experience for the 10%ers of what keeps them energized, not burn out, keep it going, kind of that internal buzz rather than
Could you hear his question? Okay, so my experience is for a while, and probably a long while, you can be fed by, it's exhilarating to have that kind of influence with people that are influential. Because remember, none of this pushing and shoving and, oh, please, would you pay attention? This person is hungry for what you got to offer. It's fun. It's enjoyable. It's fulfilling. That can carry you for a long time, and maybe your whole career. I'll share with you my experience. I started too early, okay? Connor Partners is 43 years old at this point, okay? So what happened to me personally is doing all of this for corporate America became less and less intriguing for me. So Connor Partners is still doing all that. I've started a separate firm, Connor Advisory, that only works with NGOs. That's all I work with. So Habitat for Humanity, Doctors Without Borders, World Vision, those are my clients. For me, what I found was, if I'm going to do the same thing, I'm not doing anything different than I would have for a corporate client. But with this table, we're going to help them sell sugar water or razor blades, whatever. This table is about clean water in Africa, AIDS education, homes after people that have been destroyed through tsunami. So for me, the relevancy of our profession just is much more of a draw here. But all I did was find what could feed me. That's the key. Find what feeds you. If you don't, at a certain point, you either go do something else or you go comatose. And there's no soul to what you're doing. It's a great question. Yes?
So with the 10%ers, are you concerned at all the extent to which there's a lot of show person, showmanship involved? And I lived 2 years, I was part of 10%ers, traveled around the world, and what I found is there was a lot of creating a crisis as we get in the door and say, we know we're 10%ers, so first thing we do, create a crisis, we get listened to. Secondly, everything we're bringing you is new. Whatever you've had in the past, that was old. We're 10%ers. This is new, shiny stuff. And there was a lot of what I call showmanship involved.
Yeah.
And I compare that to how I've spent most of my career with C-levels, but also with mid-level people, really helping citizens, impacting strategies, more of the real stuff you're talking about. To me, I see doing more, for me, I do more of that work at mid-level, sometimes with supervisors, and in a very authentic way versus my 10%er experience.
Yeah. Well, you're on top of a legitimate concerns for as I look at it. You're describing 10 percenters. Let's just assume that they meet all the criteria, right? And they're working with senior leaders. But you're describing a part of our profession that's driven by the ego rather than the value that's being created, right? And come on, I mean, we all are invested in an ego at a certain level, but what's the primary driver? Is it me looking a certain way, or is the value drive here toward relevancy, toward something that's actually going to make a difference? The language I use to try to guide this second company is we only take on engagements where the changes matter. So it's changes that matter. Now, anything could matter, right? So the definition I have, a change that matters is a change that will make a qualitative difference in the human experience. Now that's still pretty broad, but it cuts out a whole bunch of stuff that might be ego-driven, right? The other thing that is important, I think, around 10% work is to understand that you're a conduit, you're not the source. You're talking about people that think they actually are the source of whatever happened. Instead of, I had a front row seat when that organization decided to wake up and get serious about change. And it was great that, that I got to work with them. But whatever happened came through me. I'm not smart enough to figure all that. So yeah, 10%'s got its ego stuff like anybody else. My experience is, though, that it doesn't have the same impact. That the practitioners you're describing don't have the same impact as those that are grounded in generating value instead of ego points. It's just my experience. What else?
When you talk about that, the ego and the show, I think back to one of the first things you said. That only 10% of the leaders might even want this. And I have a saying, Dilbert is funny because it's true. And the funniest thing is most of the leaders don't see themselves in it. So what you really talked about is a match between somebody who wants to make an authentic difference and somebody who wants your authentic advice, even if that differs. A lot of senior leaders don't want that. They'll tell you they want that, but they don't want that.
Yeah.
So you're really talking about that marriage between, an authentic leader and that authentic person.
Well said, well said. And there are many ways to calibrate that kind of match, but I like the one that you picked. Feedback is a great metric. What's your tolerance, leader, for feedback? Is it, you're open to it as long as it makes you look good? And can I only bring recommendations that you're comfortable with? So that's why I wanted to touch on, to me, the kind of influence we're talking about is to be influential, particularly when the leader doesn't like what you have to say. And his or her first response is to repulse away from it. How can you be influential? If he or she hates what you say, but deeply listens and values and appreciates that it's being said, to me, that's the influence that we want. Now, to your point, where are the leaders that can do that dance with you? Well, there's not a lot of them. That's why the calculus works, guys. There doesn't have to be a lot of us doing this. What I want to bring to our attention is somebody's got to do it, though, because there's actually leaders like that. They're out there. They're out there. And we will have our profession, if we can serve them, will have a disproportionate level of influence. Because one of those leaders and one of our practitioners, they can make a huge difference. Huge difference. Great question. What else? Yes, sir.
Darryl, I can only speak from my own personal point of view, but I think the character part of this conversation is really fascinating. I think because it takes tremendous courage and naked honesty to chip away the trunk and get down to the sapling. And I'd be interested in your kind of thoughts about recommendations about where to start, what to do. There's not a lot of platforms for us to go to do that, except in your own space?
Well, there's not many places to go. I mean, there are some, but there's not many places to go. So let's start with just going inside yourself. And that's one of the things I like about that picture is it's just an inside job, guys. My own experience is it's been very difficult. It continues to be difficult to pull away the layers. And every layer that I pull away, within 24 hours, there's another one back on, right? So this is a vigilance. This isn't a task to be done. Is to pull into, what did I not say to the client yesterday that I actually haven't had an obligation to say, but I got scared. Something became a competitive, who knows what all the reasons are, right? We have to be able to confront ourselves with that. So this is very introspective work. Now, any place you can go that would foster that kind of introspection, then I would encourage you to do it. And maybe it's just a peer, maybe it's another colleague here that would be willing to engage with you in, I'll look at me and you look at you. Let's do this. Let's have a place to talk about last week and what happened and what didn't. But wherever you go, whatever you go to foster this in yourself, make sure you're going to a place that will be brutally frank with you. All right? This is not an affirmation exercise. So here are the steps to feedback. There's feedback. And then there's challenging feedback. Whoa. Then there's, whoa, I can't believe you said that feedback. And then there's tough love feedback. And then there's anabuse. Hold up your hand if you know what anabuse is. A few folks. Anabuse is medication that people struggling with alcoholism might choose to take. If they get it, they ask for it. You cannot impose it on them. There's pharmacology and psychology. The pharmacology is, it's usually in liquid form. If you take it every morning for the next 48 hours, if you consume the slightest bit of alcohol, you become violently ill. Why is this important? Psychology. It's from the psychology side. Because alcoholics are notorious for blaming everybody else for their problems. There's only two variables. And I'm in control of both of them. Beer and anabuse. And trust me, you do not want to mix these, okay? It's not life-threatening, but it feels like that. So I've set up my own reinforcements, my own feedback system here. If I slip, I'm going to kick myself in the rear. I've got it set up. Paul, whatever you use, friend, colleague, program you go to, anything that would help you crawl in and find out, if I'm not trying to satisfy everybody else, what's at the core of me, and more important, how does that create value for my client? I'm not talking about personal growth, guys. I want to be real clear with you. There are personal growth implications to what we're talking. I'm talking about professional development. Whatever you do, be in an environment where you can get everything up to anabuse. In your face, anabuse. Because we got a lot of trunk. The trunk is the protection mechanism. It's great. There's nothing wrong with trunk. The sapling wouldn't have made it without the trunk. These layers of protection were important. And it's now important to get down to, but what's underneath there? If I wasn't protecting this engagement, if I was actually just telling the CEO what's going on, what's that? It's hard to do. My experience is it's hard to do that on your own. So we need, to me, you need community, not just a person. This is now my second visit of having the good fortune of working with some of your practitioners. You've got the core of a community here that can do this with each other. I strongly recommend that you do that. But don't, it's fine to support each other and be there for each other when you need, that's great, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you knowing enough about what I'm struggling with at my sapling to just call my hand on what happened yesterday. And I need to be keeping you informed enough so that you know what's going on with me. So it's really a partnership. That's what I mean by community. That's how we're going to rate. Our profession, guys, needs to lift up, okay? We've been kind of hanging out here for a while. And if you take for me, it's a historic view, okay? We needed to, right? We didn't have anything. We didn't even have a profession. Then we had a profession with no tools. Now we got tools. Well, what's next? Mastery, right? And moving to mastery is an introspective experience. It's not just more tools and techniques. But doing that with, even if community is only one other person that can help you cut through your defenses to get down to what's actually going on. Yes.
Earlier you mentioned scar tissue.
Yep.
How does that relate to what we've just been talking about?
Earlier you mentioned scar tissue. How does that relate to what you just talked about?
Scar tissue for me is what's left after a painful lesson. Lessons come in many forms, but the ones that for me are more meaningful are when I really screwed up, big time. Hurt myself, hurt others, and had to come to terms with not just that, but what are the implications, what are the learnings, right? And the scar tissue is, that's never gonna happen again, okay? That putting my hand on that oven, okay, fine, never again. That's different than an intellectual insight, right? So scar tissue me is deeper. It's a reminder of the price that I will pay if I do that again. And so it just has a whole different influence. Now, there's different types of scar tissue. The deepest, the most influential is when you actually put your hand on the stove yourself. And it was just horrible experience. That's from a learning standpoint, that's good. But there's less intense scar tissue. You can learn some important lessons by watching somebody else put their hands on the stove. Whoa, I'm not doing that. You might have gotten your job because the other person put their hand on their stove, right? And you moved in. So we can learn that way. It's not as deep, but it's legitimate learning. And it may be learning that you can apply. The next step up less in intensity is when you were coached or mentored. And somebody that you really value and trust said, don't ever do this, it won't work for you. And you bought it, you took it on. You didn't need to try heroin because this guy said, let me tell you, you don't want heroin, okay? And you took it on. So there's different types of scar tissue, but I think you'll find that we are most influenced when we personally screw up. So let's talk about screwing up. There's a difference between mistakes and failure. I personally do not subscribe to this notion that we ought to have freedom to fail. Every time I fail, it costs. Every time somebody in my company fails, it costs. So there's nothing free about this. The issue is, how much did it cost and what currency is going to be used to pay for it? What doesn't work is to try to pay for something with money. So what are we going to use? We're going to use learning. Okay. So if you screw up, here's the mark and you came in below it, but you recognized what happened, you learned from it, you applied the learning, you shared the learning with others. We're going to call that a mistake. That's not failure. Failure is when you screwed up and, oh, it wasn't me. And I don't know what lessons to learn, and if I did, I'd keep it to myself. That's failure. You should have zero tolerance for failure. Nothing. Don't spend any time around failure. You should have an unlimited supply of acceptance for mistakes. But people have to pay for their mistakes. Learning, application, sharing, that's the currency. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Daryl, so in your journey through the 10% space, is there any pattern at all you've noticed in terms of where you find the 10% leaders or how you find them?
Great question. Yeah, I jump ship to where they are, or where a lot of them are. I don't want to imply at all that there's not 10%ers in corporations. They are. I got to work with them. There's a heavy concentration of them with NGOs. Not all of them. You got your ego freaks and everything there too, but they're there mostly for a calling. And so let me do an advertisement here. I've stumbled on a sector that doesn't know anything about what we do. It is completely unclaimed territory, guys. And, are you ready for this? They're in the midst of humongous transformational change. Long before the Trump impact that they're feeling now, the whole paradigm has begun to crumble. And then you add on top of that what Oxfam is dealing with, today. Everything is unraveling. More importantly, they don't just need what we do, they're incredibly receptive to what we do, okay? So I can't encourage you to go find some work there. And I'm not even talking about pro bono work. This is a company, it's not pro bono, okay? I started a company to work with them. So this isn't altruism, I mean, you could do that too. It is a sector that needs what we do. Now, if you're a 65%er, I just hope you do it. If you're a 10%er, you have a responsibility to go serve that, in my view. Not you personally, us collectively. Look, here's the calculus. Either what we do makes a difference or it doesn't. If it does make a difference, we have to be attentive to where we apply it, right? Those people, on any given day, they may not accomplish everything. They are trying to do incredibly powerful things for humanity. How can we not serve that community? On top of that, there's a job there, okay? So to answer your question, I'm sure there's other pockets, but I found a pocket that didn't know how to spell change management and was receptive and in the middle of it. I can't say enough about how much I wish you would at least consider some work in that area. I think you'll find it very fulfilling. What else? Yes?
So as a consultant working at that 10% level, how many clients do you work with at one time? What's that ebb and flow look like?
For me, it's about 4 at a time. After that, I'm kind of spinning plates, right? Because another caveat here. So Connor Partners does what it does. This new company doesn't have any employees. I have one partner. And he was in charge of change management for PwC. So both of us said, we don't want to build another, we've done that. You know what happens when you build a company and everybody else gets to go have fun? 10%, I deployed 10%ers to go do 10% work, and I'm sitting, So there's not a staff to go, it's just he and I, right? And so I've learned that my threshold's right around 4. Because it's pretty consuming. I mean, they're all in. They're all in. Please don't, I'm happy to share my experience with you, but I don't want to leave you the impression that that's the only place to find 10% leaders. That's not true at all. But it's a pond with a lot of fish. It's a small pond. A lot of fish in that pond, though. What else?
Yes, ma'am. I have some
questions for you around ethical leadership, but I wasn't really sure where to go with it, so I almost didn't ask, but I didn't want Q&A to come to an end before I pulled it out of you. I'm sure you have, on more than one occasion, found yourself working for someone and then found your jaw on the ground going, oh no, this person is not ethical. What have you done in those situations? Have you ever pulled out, you know, a fantastic relationship and actually encouraged this person to behave more ethically? Or have you stumbled across some ways to vet the situation to know that you're getting involved with someone who is ethical?
That's a great, I've never been asked that question. That's a great question. So I suspect if I stayed with it longer, my answer would be yeah, I'm sure. I have been incredibly fortunate. There's never been an ethical breach that I had to deal with on their part. Let me tell you what is common though, is I want you to go fix everybody else, Daryl. Don't touch me. And I think of myself as pretty good at smelling that out. Well, year before last, we had a nonprofit engagement, big cultural shift. It's a school system. It was in a lot of trouble. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better mission, right, to work with. And the CEO, she was amazing. And everything was getting done. And just because of the way things worked out, she was sort of the last to get the antabuse, right? And dumb me, I thought it was just, that's just the way it worked out. No. When it was her time at bat, I don't think so. But I'm really appreciative of what you did with the others. Well, everything unraveled, right? So, it's much more, it's not ethical breaches that I see so much as commitment breaches, as tenacity breaches, as I want my cake and eat it too stuff, you know. Yeah, we want to transform the organization. I just don't want to transform myself. Well, it doesn't work that way. So that's what I see much more often. And it's embarrassing to me to be this far into my career and to get suckered like that. I mean, this was just 2 years ago. Completely blindsided. I was ready to put her in a formaldehyde jar. She was such a good sponsor until we got to her. Yeah.
So with that, I'm just curious, so how did you take that learning and take it forward in building your relationships and working in other projects when you're working with other clients? Because I'm sure if you hadn't necessarily really run into that before, that probably shakes you and you really have to figure out.
Well, you're giving me too much credit. I have seen it before. I just was stupid. I don't know. You know what I think? I wanted to work with that school system so bad. In retrospect, there was plenty of signals. I just wanted it too bad, right? So what happened was, I confronted her with it, and she said, yeah, okay, but I'm not doing it. So we just stopped the engagement. That was that. But here's the learning. My partner and I, what we extracted from that was a fourth criteria. I gave you 3 criteria: transformational, realization, burning platform, intensity. We now have a 4th criteria. Is the leader prepared for introspective work? And if they're not, we don't take the engagement. Because if they're not, that means that the only thing that's left is tactical work. 65%, which is fine, except that's not what we want to do. So it was a very important lesson for us.
It was just a mistake, not a failure.
I consider it a mistake. I do. I consider it a mistake.
And now you've added to our scar tissue.
Only if you apply it.
Right.
It doesn't work, guys, to go, that was cool. Scar tissue, you have to own it. It's fine if it was at my expense, that's fine. But you actually have to walk away going, okay, I'm going to hang on to that. Then we're actually transferring scar tissue. Otherwise, it's entertainment. Yes, sir.
So what are some of the methods that you've used or you use now going forward to ensure that your client or prospective client is interested and ready before the engagement? I
I probe as deeply as I can, as fast as I can, in order to find where their discomfort is. And whatever that is, I go, yeah, well, what if we have to do that? So the CEO has not talked to Carol, who's a senior officer, in 2 years. He just doesn't like her. But she actually brings in a lot of revenue, right? So you got all that going on. So if I quickly got to, this is over lunch. I don't have an engagement. He's buying lunch, that's it. We talk about, well, there's this Carol thing. So I don't know, I haven't done any diagnostic work, but well, what if we find out that you and Carol have to clean this up? You might have to actually fire your brother-in-law, as a matter of fact, or whatever. Anything I can find to stress test. Because see, the lunch is about how committed we are to transformational change. Yeah, okay, right. Let's put some invoices on the table. Yeah, you want transformation. Are you willing to confront her? You willing to fire your brother? So that's what I do. And personally, I'm as proud of the projects that I help abort as the ones I help implement. If I can help them understand they are not ready for this at all, I think I've done a service. What else?
I do have a question. I love that sculpture. But one thing that, as you've been telling your stories, that sculpture, he went to the sapling and then it was a done deal. And
yes.
Some of what you're talking about and the scar tissue, it feels as if this is a lifelong
It's
endeavor,
ongoing.
obviously, and I was curious what your practice was.
No, you're dead. The metaphor breaks down at this point. Did you hear her point, the issue she was raising?
Probably not, but. So my question is, in thinking about that sculpture, which was beautiful, it seems to stop short of this idea of what your stories have been, which is that it's sort of an iterative process. You're constantly having to go back, and I wondered what your practice was for that.
You're dead on here, because what he sells his work, but a lot of them they end up in museums. Well, I think it's in Germany. Anyway, the picture I showed you looked that way 2 years ago, and it'll look that way 10 years from now. It's fixed. So once the trunk was out of the way, boom, you got it. If you work really, really hard and get down to the core of your sapling, that's good for about 24 hours. It's ongoing. It's ongoing. And if you're not up for it, then don't get in the game. Mastery is not about getting to a place. It's about working it.
Thank you.
It's about working it. Yes, sir.
A couple questions ago, when you were asking how do you vet that leader, it just reminded me of something we teach a lot in this business, and that is behavioral-based questions in interviewing. And so one would think it would lend itself very well to talk with an executive about, tell me about a time where you've had to change your mindset or do something differently. I mean, is there some way to probe by asking for examples in the past when they've done that?
Yeah, and I don't want to pull you away from that if that works for you. I don't like it.
Don't you?
No. Because too many of them have learned to tell the story. So what I want to know is what's bothered you today that you're not dealing with? Let's talk about that. So it's not that there's anything wrong with it, but there's too much wiggle room, particularly because behavioral-based construct has now been around long enough that you can game it. Oh, I know what they're going to do. Let me get my narrative all straightened out here, right? So,
cool. Thank you.
yeah.
One more question.
So before you had the luxury to walk away in those circumstances for leaders, were you ever presented with an opportunity to help break or persuade a leader to put in the work to enhance themselves, and what's worked?
What was the first part of the question about?
Are you wanting me to repeat it? Because
No, I want you to say it differently. Luxury.
Yeah, before you had the luxury to
Of,
say.
of what?
No.
What luxury are you talking about?
Sorry, I guess, yeah. Before you were able to, get to the point where you're in your career, where you're able to say, I think we've made it to this point, in our discussions and vetted that you're not, willing to put in the work to move forward.
Oh, so it's where I am in this relationship, not in my career.
True.
You sure? Yeah, yeah. So let's do the career one first, okay? You don't get a hall pass here because, if I was doing it 40 years, I could do it. Day one. You're either this way or you're not. 10%ers are not created, right? You're either wired from the factory that way or you're not. Now, if you have the predisposition, then there's things you can do to draw it out, but you don't pour 10%ers, you don't pour something in them. You help draw it out. And one of the indications of it's in there is you do it when you can't afford to do it. You turn down bad business because it's bad business. And you go, oh, what the hell am I going to do about the rent, okay? 10%ers are artists that simply have to paint. Oh, I wish somebody would buy this thing, but I have to paint this way. That's 10%ers. So I just want to be clear. This isn't something, one day you'll be safe. No, there's nothing safe now for me, right? I don't like walking away from, I don't enjoy taking the risk. I don't like it financially, I don't like it personally. What I don't like more is not practicing my craft. And I tell clients, my allegiance is not to them. My allegiance is to practice this craft as I understand it. And if that is useful for them, then it's a great match, right? Okay, the second part of your question was what?
So when you find a leader who may not be ready, or it's somebody that you wouldn't say is, through your vetting process, passes with flying colors.
Right.
Have you ever been able to kind of not break them, but just persuade them to put in that work?
No. What I have been able to do is to help them see that they have a predisposition that hasn't come out yet. I've not been able, I don't have a technique to make them the way they ought to be, but you can help them understand that their sapling is just covered up. They actually have, and what I look for is, are they intuitively kind of trying to do some stuff, they just don't know how? That's a good sign. If you talk about openness and candor as an important ingredient to transformational change, and they go, wow, what? I can't even relate to that. That's not a good sign, okay? And you can't pour in the value of candor. But it might be covered up, it might be, so just think of it as you don't pour it in, but what you, in that first time with them, what you're looking for is, do they have predisposition? Because you can do something with predisposition. And I got to go. Thank you, guys. I love coming here. I love it. Thank you.